I knew my mother-in-law had been waiting for a chance to rewrite my wedding day, but I never expected her to do it with a password I stopped using 3 years ago. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with rain tapping softly against the kitchen window and a mug of coffee cooling beside my laptop, I opened our wedding gallery to choose a few photos for our first anniversary dinner. Ethan and I had been married 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, and I wanted to frame one picture for the hallway, the kind of simple, happy thing a wife should be able to do without feeling her stomach drop. But the moment the images loaded, I felt something turn cold inside me. That wasn't my wedding, not the way I remembered it. In one photo, I was mid-blink, my mouth half open, my bouquet awkwardly tilted like I didn't know what to do with my own hands. In another, my mother had been cropped almost entirely out of the frame, leaving only the sleeve of her pale blue dress at the edge like she had been an afterthought. In another, Linda, my mother-in-law, stood front and center during a family portrait, smiling like the bride herself, while I had been shifted so far to the side it looked as if I had wandered into someone else's ceremony by mistake. I clicked through faster, my fingers stiff on the trackpad. More bad angles, more strange crops, more moments that made me look tense, graceless, out of place. Our first dance was reduced to a frame where Ethan was glancing over my shoulder and Linda was visible in the background, watching with that small, satisfied smile she wore whenever she believed she'd gotten away with something. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. The family group chat. Linda had sent a message with 3 red heart emojis and the kind of sugary enthusiasm that always made my skin prickle. I can't wait to surprise everyone with a beautiful wedding slideshow at anniversary dinner this Saturday. I found the sweetest pictures. Some memories deserve to be shared the right way. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the gallery. Shared the right way. My coffee had gone cold, but I still wrapped both hands around the mug like it could steady me. Ethan was at work. Rachel was in meetings. And I was alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt too quiet, staring at a digital version of my own wedding day that had been rearranged into something I didn't recognize. Linda had always hated that our wedding hadn't revolved around her. She hated that I chose a private ceremony in Napa instead of the country club ballroom she wanted. She hated that my father walked me down the aisle before she got her mother of the groom moment. She hated that the photographer focused on Ethan and me instead of treating her like the unofficial hostess of the event. At the time, I told myself she was just difficult, traditional, controlling in that polished, suburban way that came wrapped in pearls and passive-aggressive compliments. But this was different. This was deliberate. Someone had logged in. Someone had chosen the worst versions of my happiest day. Someone had reshaped those memories into a quiet little humiliation, then announced plans to put them on a screen in front of both families over catered salmon and white wine. I clicked the account settings. Recent access history. One unfamiliar login from a desktop browser the night before. My pulse slowed instead of racing. That was how I knew I was angry. Truly angry. Because when I panic, I move fast. When I know exactly what kind of woman I'm dealing with, I get very still. There was only one person in Ethan's family who still remembered the old password I used back when I was planning bridal appointments, floral mock-ups, and vendor payments in the middle of all that chaos. Only one person who sat beside me once and smiled too closely while I typed. Only one person who would call sabotage a gift. I didn't text her. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't say a word. I just opened my contacts, scrolled to my photographer's name, and whispered into the empty kitchen. You should have remembered one thing, Linda. Women like me keep backups. I called Maya Bennett before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm and warm, the same way it had been on my wedding morning when a groomsman had gone missing and my veil had nearly blown across the vineyard lawn. Claire, she said, surprised but friendly. Everything all right? I looked at the screen again, at the version of my life someone had edited into a private joke, and I chose my words carefully. I think someone got into our wedding gallery. There was a pause. Not dramatic, just professional. The kind that told me she was already taking me seriously. Tell me exactly what you were seeing, she said. So I did. The bad crops. The missing family shots. The awkward expressions selected so consistently it could not possibly be random. The family group message. The anniversary slideshow Linda was suddenly so eager to present as if she had been appointed guardian of our memories. Maya did not interrupt me once. When I finished, I heard keyboard clicks on her end. Okay, she said after a moment. I am in the back end now. Your client gallery was accessed last night at 9:14 p.m. from a desktop browser. Several favorites were changed. A custom export folder was created. And Claire. Her voice softened by half a degree. The original files are untouched. I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved. Not yet. More because something inside me settled into place. I had been right. That mattered. Do you keep everything? I asked. Raw files, original edits, timestamps, all of it. She gave a small laugh. I am a wedding photographer, not a magician. I keep everything because families are complicated. That almost made me smile. Almost. She explained it all in simple terms, and I wrote it down on the back of an unopened electric bill with the pen I kept by the fruit bowl. Raw files stored on her local archive and cloud backup. Original export batches with timestamps. Gallery access logs. Version history on favorites and album changes. If someone had tried to curate a false narrative from the gallery, she could prove exactly what had been altered and when. She could even generate a side-by-side comparison if I needed it. I stared out the kitchen window while she spoke. The rain had stopped. The hydrangeas along the fence were bent low with water, their pale blooms heavy and bruised-looking, but still standing. Maya, I said quietly, if I asked for a clean export of the original wedding set and proof of the changes, how quickly could you send it? Within the hour, she replied. Claire, do you want me to ask why? I looked toward the family room, where Linda had once stood in this very house with a casserole dish and a smile so rehearsed it felt like theater. She had kissed my cheek and told me I was lucky to have married into such a close family. Then she spent the next 10 months proving that in her mind, close meant controlled. No, I said. I think you already know enough. After we hung up, I stood very still in the middle of the kitchen. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Linda in the group chat. I found the most meaningful moments. You will all love them. Rachel reacted with a heart. Ethan sent a thumbs up from his office. I could almost see Linda sitting in her breakfast nook across town, pleased with herself, believing she had found a clean, elegant way to make me look smaller without ever raising her voice. That was always her style. Never open cruelty, just polished rearrangement. The kind that could be dismissed as taste. Preference. A misunderstanding. But now I had something better than suspicion. I had logs. Timestamps. Originals. I had the one thing women like Linda never plan for because they are too busy admiring their own cleverness. I had a witness with receipts. When Maya's email came through 43 minutes later, I opened the attachments one by one. Original ceremony set. Family portraits. Couple portraits. First dance. Side-by-side comparison file. Gallery access summary. Clean, precise, impossible to argue with. I downloaded everything into a folder on my desktop and named it something simple. Saturday. By Thursday morning, I had done what women like Linda never expected me to do. I had stopped reacting and started preparing. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft clicking of my laptop keys as I built a folder so organized it almost felt ceremonial. Originals. Altered versions. Access logs. Export timestamps. A PDF Maya had labeled comparison set, where each manipulated image sat beside the real one like a lie standing next to a sworn statement. I printed the most obvious examples on heavyweight matte paper from the office supply store down the street because I did not want to rely on a screen alone. Screens can freeze. Wi-Fi can fail. Files can mysteriously not open. Paper, on the other hand, lands with a certain kind of truth. I laid the prints across the dining room table and looked at them in pairs. In one, Ethan was slipping my ring onto my finger under the arbor, his face soft, focused, almost reverent. In Linda's version, that moment had been cropped tighter, so my hand was cut off at the wrist, and his mother, standing 2 rows back in blush silk, was suddenly framed almost perfectly over his shoulder. In another, my father was kissing my forehead before walking me down the aisle. In the altered version, he was gone entirely, removed so neatly that only the edge of his navy tie remained at the border like evidence someone forgot to erase. And the worst one, somehow, was not the ugliest. It was the first dance. The real image was warm and balanced, my cheek against Ethan's shoulder, string lights glowing behind us, both of us laughing at something only we could hear. The edited one had been reordered in the export, and placed next to a shot where Ethan was glancing toward the head table, right at Linda, while I looked caught mid-step and slightly off balance. It changed the story without changing a single fact. That was what made it cruel. Not invention. Arrangement. By noon, Rachel was at my kitchen island with an iced tea in one hand and the comparison prints in the other. She had been my maid of honor, my college roommate, and the one person who could spot passive aggression from across a parking lot. She studied the pages in silence for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "This is not just meddling," she said. "This is curation with intent." I gave her a look. "You sound like a prosecutor." "I grew up Catholic in New Jersey," she said dryly. "I know a family power play when I see one." Then she pointed to the access log Maya had sent. "And this matters. The timing especially. She did this after announcing the slideshow in the chat." "Before," I said. "By less than an hour." Rachel nodded once. "Then she wanted control before she wanted applause." That sounded exactly right. Later that afternoon, Ethan came home early, loosened his tie in the hallway, and found me at the table with the prints stacked neatly in front of me. He looked tired in the way men do when they think they are walking into an ordinary domestic problem and have no idea how much larger it is. "You are still on the photo thing?" he asked gently, setting his keys in the bowl by the door. I hated that phrase immediately. The photo thing. As if my wedding memories were a misplaced receipt or a dented casserole dish. "I am on the evidence thing," I said. He frowned, not defensive yet, but close. "Claire, my mother can be overbearing. I know that. But she loves family history. Maybe she just picked some bad shots." I slid one pair across the table toward him. Then another. Then the access log. He looked down. His expression shifted, but only slightly. Confusion first. Then discomfort. Then the reflexive loyalty of a son who had spent 34 years translating his mother's behavior into something easier to live with. "This still does not prove it was her," he said. "It proves someone used the account. Using an old password I only typed around one person during wedding planning." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You are making a serious accusation." "No," I said, folding the access log back into its sleeve. "I am waiting for her to make the mistake of proving me right in front of everyone." Friday arrived bright and clear, the kind of California morning that made everything look cleaner than it was. By 8:30, sunlight was already stretching across the hardwood floors in long gold stripes. And for a moment the house looked so peaceful, it almost felt absurd that I was planning for emotional triage instead of anniversary dinner flowers. Ethan left for work with a kiss on my forehead and that careful, neutral expression he wore when he wanted to stay out of the middle. He had not defended Linda the night before exactly, but he had not stepped toward me either. He hovered in that familiar space between husband and son, hoping reality would soften if he refused to look at it too directly. As soon as his car backed out of the driveway, my phone lit up with another message from Linda. "Sweetheart, I found the perfect cream table linens for tomorrow. I knew you would appreciate something elegant. Also, I polished up the photo sequence. It tells the story so beautifully now." I read that sentence 3 times. Polished up. Not selected. Not organized. Polished up. There it was. Hidden in plain sight. The little verbal slip of a woman who believed she was too refined to ever be caught. I did not answer right away. Instead, I made toast I did not eat, poured coffee I forgot to drink, and opened my laptop again. I went back through every small moment from the wedding planning months, not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted to understand the shape of her confidence. There had been the afternoon at the bridal suite downtown when my florist called, and I handed Linda my laptop for exactly 2 minutes while I stepped into the hallway. There had been the vineyard walkthrough when she insisted on helping me keep all the vendor details in one place, and watched over my shoulder while I logged into the gallery preview portal Maya had set up. There had been the bridal shower when she laughed and said, "You young women and your passwords." I never remember mine, but I always notice other people's. At the time, everyone laughed. So did I. Women like Linda rely on that. They say the thing out loud, wrapped in charm, and count on no one wanting to be impolite enough to hear the warning. Around noon, Maya called me back with one more detail. "I was reviewing the activity logs again," she said. "There is something else. The export folder created last night was named Family Dinner Slideshow. Whoever did this was not just browsing. They were preparing a presentation." I looked out the front window at the hydrangeas again, still damp from the week's rain, their pale heads nodding in the breeze like they knew something I did not. "Thank you," I said. "Can you do one more thing for me?" "Probably," she said. "Would you be willing to be available tomorrow evening? Not in person unless necessary. Just reachable. If I need you to verify the originals in real time." She did not hesitate. "Absolutely." That steadied me more than I expected. It was not just about the files anymore. It was about structure, witnesses, timing. Linda had built her whole life on soft deniability. She could survive hurt feelings. She could survive awkwardness. What she could not survive was a calm, orderly sequence of facts delivered in front of the exact audience she had chosen. By late afternoon, I finally answered her text. I kept my reply warm, brief, and harmless. "That sounds lovely. Thank you for putting so much care into it." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Anything for family." I stared at that for a long second. Family. It was the word she used whenever she wanted access without permission, influence without accountability, intimacy without boundaries. She never meant love. She meant territory. That evening, after Ethan came home, I said nothing about the new log detail. I let him eat dinner. I asked about his meeting. I laughed at a story about the office coffee machine flooding the break room. Then I handed him a printed place card I had made for the table setup and asked him where he thought his mother would want to sit. He smiled, relieved by the ordinary question, and pointed to the head of the table without even thinking. "There," he said. I set the card down carefully and looked at him. That is what she thinks too. Saturday arrived with the kind of bright, polished sunlight people always describe as perfect weather, which felt almost insulting. By 4 o'clock, the house smelled like rosemary chicken, buttered rolls, and the lemon cake I had baked that morning because I refused to let Linda own every detail of the evening, even if she had already tried to claim the story. I set the dining table with the cream linens she had recommended, not because I needed her taste, but because I wanted her comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. The silver flatware caught the late afternoon light in thin, sharp flashes. The candles were trimmed, but not lit yet. The printed proof sat inside a slim white folder in the drawer beside the buffet, close enough for my hand to reach without trembling. Ethan moved around the kitchen carrying serving dishes, quieter than usual, as if he sensed there was weather in the room he could not yet name. He asked me twice if I was all right. Both times I smiled and said yes in the same calm tone. That seemed to unsettle him more than if I had cried. Linda arrived at 5:15 carrying a bouquet of pale pink roses and a confidence so polished it almost looked like grace. She kissed Ethan on the cheek, air-kissed near mine, and stepped inside like a woman entering a venue she had personally curated. "Everything looks beautiful," she said, glancing around with approval that was just a shade too proprietary. I knew the cream would soften the room. Behind her came Ethan's Aunt Marjorie and Uncle Stephen, then his younger sister Brooke with her husband Daniel. Not a huge gathering, just enough family to make public embarrassment matter. Just enough witnesses to turn discomfort into consequence. Linda noticed the framed photo on the entry table the moment she set down her purse. It was one of the real ones from the ceremony. Ethan and me beneath the arbor, his forehead touching mine, the late afternoon sun warming the edge of my veil. Her smile paused, only for a second, but I saw it. "Oh," she said lightly, "that is a lovely choice. I almost forgot about that one." I looked at her and smiled. I did not. Dinner moved the way good family dinners always do on the surface. Butter passed hand to hand. Marjorie complimented the chicken. Stephen asked Ethan about work. Brooke talked about a preschool fundraiser. Linda laughed in the right places, poured wine, touched Ethan's shoulder when she wanted to redirect a conversation, and made sure everyone noticed the sleek black flash drive resting beside her plate like a little ceremonial object. She was glowing with anticipation, the way some women glow before making a toast, and others glow before collecting a debt. At one point she reached for my hand across the table and said, "I just think anniversaries should honor the truth of how a family comes together." Her fingers were cool, her manicure flawless, her smile aimed carefully enough to be read as affection by anyone who did not know better. I held her gaze and squeezed once, gently. "I agree completely." Ethan looked between us then, uneasy, but he said nothing. That was his last mistake of the evening, though I did not know it yet. After dessert, Linda stood with the satisfied energy of a woman stepping onto a small private stage. "Before coffee," she said, Lifting the flash drive between two fingers, I prepared a little surprise. Just a sweet reminder of a day we will all treasure forever. She moved to the television console in the family room and bent gracefully to insert the drive. The screen lit up blue, then shifted to the first image. My stomach did not drop this time. It settled. The room darkened as Ethan dimmed the lamps. Candlelight flickered from the dining room behind us. The slideshow began with a slow piano instrumental Linda had clearly selected for emotional effect. And there it was on the screen in giant, glowing detail. My father cropped nearly out of the frame, my face caught in the split second before a smile. Linda standing perfectly composed in the background, like she had always intended to be remembered first. Marjorie shifted in her chair. Brooke frowned slightly. No one said anything. They did not need to. The room had already begun to understand that something was off. Linda folded her hands in her lap and watched the screen with the serene satisfaction of someone admiring a masterpiece. I let 3 more altered photos pass before I stood up. I did not raise my voice. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Not the screen. Not the strange cropping. Not even Linda's little performance with the music and the practiced smile. It was the fact that I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my dress, and said, "Would you mind pausing it for a second?" in the same tone someone might use to ask for more ice water. Linda turned toward me with a look of gentle confusion that would have been impressive if I had not seen her rehearse it for nearly a year. "Oh, of course," she said, pressing the remote. The piano music cut off mid-note. The frozen image on the television showed Ethan reaching for my hand while I looked awkward and distracted, as if my own wedding had happened around me instead of to me. I stepped toward the television, but not too close. Close enough to own the room. "I just wanted to ask something before we keep going," I said, folding my hands loosely in front of me. "Linda, where did you get these files?" The room went still in that special family way where no one wants to be the first person to admit tension exists. Linda tilted her head, smiling. "From the gallery, sweetheart. You know that. I only wanted to make something meaningful." Sweetheart. She always used that word when she was trying to make me sound unstable before I had even spoken. I nodded. That is what I thought. Then I walked to the buffet, opened the drawer, and took out the white folder. Ethan sat up straighter. Brooke leaned forward in her chair. Marjorie's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. I set the folder on the coffee table and opened it with the kind of care people usually reserve for legal documents or bad news from a doctor. "I called Maya," I said. "She sent me the original files this week." Linda's smile did not disappear, but it tightened at the corners. "Claire, honestly, if this is about a few unflattering angles, weddings always have." I lifted one print and held it beside the frozen television image. Same moment. 2 entirely different stories. In the original, my father was fully in frame, standing beside me with his hand at my back. My expression was soft and warm, not strained. The television version had cut him almost completely out and selected the exact half second where I looked uncertain. No one spoke. I placed a second print beside the first, then a third. "These are side-by-side comparisons from the photographer," I said. "Original export on the left. Your slideshow version on the right." Linda let out a tiny laugh that sounded almost elegant if you were not listening carefully. "I just picked the ones I thought looked natural." "No," I said. "You created a custom export folder 2 nights ago called Family Dinner Slideshow. That landed harder than I expected." Stephen blinked. Brooke turned to look at her mother. Ethan's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for me to see the first real fracture in the story he had been telling himself. Linda looked at him immediately, not at me. That told me everything. "I was trying to help," she said softly. "Claire gets emotional about these things, and I wanted something that reflected the family, not just the bride and groom." I asked. My voice stayed level. That seemed to bother her more than anger would have. She straightened in her chair. "I think it is unfair to make this into some accusation over a slideshow." I reached into the folder again and placed the access log on the table. Clean print. Timestamped. Browser history. Gallery activity. "Then let us not call it an accusation," I said. "Let us call it a record." Ethan stood up then, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. He took the page from my hand and read it in silence. Linda opened her mouth, ready, with another explanation, but before she could speak, his voice came out low and unfamiliar. "Mom," he said, still staring at the log. Why does this show your home desktop? No one moved. Even the candles in the dining room seemed to burn more quietly, as if the whole house had decided to hold its breath. Ethan was still standing in front of the coffee table, the access log in one hand, the comparison prints spread out below him like pieces of a puzzle he no longer wanted to solve, but could not stop seeing. Linda's face remained composed for exactly 2 seconds after his question. Then the smile slipped. Not much, just enough to show the strain underneath. Because I helped, she said, her voice soft and almost wounded now, which was her oldest trick. You know how disorganized things were during the wedding. Claire was overwhelmed, and I was trying to make sure family memories were preserved properly. Preserved properly. I almost admired the phrasing. Even cornered, she still reached for elegance. Ethan looked up from the page and stared at her in a way I had never seen before, not angry yet, just deeply confused, as if a language he had spoken his entire life had suddenly changed meaning in the middle of a sentence. Mom, he said slowly, why would you need her old password to preserve anything? Linda blinked. Once. A tiny delay. That was all. But it was enough. I did not use a password, she said, too quickly. I think it must have auto-filled on the browser, or maybe it was still connected from before. I do not remember exactly. That was when Brooke made a small sound in the back of her throat. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the involuntary noise of someone hearing a bad explanation and recognizing it for what it was. Marjorie set down her wineglass with careful precision. Stephen crossed one ankle over the other and stared at the dark television screen, suddenly fascinated by anything that was not his sister-in-law unraveling in real time. I reached into the folder again and took out the final sheet Maya had sent me, the one I had saved for exactly this moment. You are right, I said evenly. The browser did autofill. That is in the report too. It autofilled because the password had been entered manually first. On your desktop. From your saved credentials. I handed the page to Ethan. He scanned it, jaw tightening. Maya documented the session behavior, I said. She also confirmed the custom export was created after the favorites were changed. And the folder was named before you texted the group about the slideshow. Linda turned to me then, and for the first time all evening the polish dropped completely. You called the photographer? She asked, the softness gone from her voice. Over this. There it was. Not shame. Not regret. Offense. The offense of a woman who believed access was her birthright and boundaries were a personal insult. Yes, I said. Over this. She laughed once, but there was no charm left in it. Claire, this is absurd. I was trying to correct a few images. You looked tense in half of them. Your mother was wandering in and out of frame. Some of the composition was unbalanced. I was improving the album for the family. The words landed in the room like silverware dropped on tile. Brooke's eyes widened. Marjorie closed her lips into a thin line. Ethan stared at his mother as if she had just admitted to rearranging the furniture in a house she did not own. You changed our wedding photos because you thought they were unbalanced? He asked. Linda lifted one shoulder, a tiny defensive motion. I made them presentable. That was the moment the room shifted. Not because I said anything. Because Ethan finally understood the scale of it. This was not about a slideshow. It was not about one bad decision or one over-involved mother trying too hard. It was about ownership. About a woman who looked at a day that belonged to her son and his wife and decided she had the right to edit it until it reflected her preferences instead of the truth. He set the papers down very carefully, the way people do when they are afraid their hands might betray them. Then he looked at the frozen television screen, at the altered version of our first dance still paused there in soft blue light. Turn it off, he said. Linda frowned. Ethan, do not be dramatic. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. I said turn it off. And for the first time since I had known her, Linda Whitmore reached for a remote with the kind of uncertainty that belongs to people who are no longer in charge. The television screen went black, and the silence that followed felt louder than the slideshow had. No music. No polite laughter. No silverware clinking from the dining room. Just the low hum of the air conditioning and the tiny crackle of candle flames somewhere behind us. Linda still held the remote in her hand, but now it looked less like a prop and more like something she had forgotten how to use. For a long second, no one seemed sure what happened next. Then Ethan bent down, gathered the comparison prints from the coffee table, and looked at each one again with the slow, deliberate focus of a man revisiting his own memory and realizing someone had been standing inside it with scissors. "You removed Claire's father from this one," he said quietly. He held up the print so everyone could see. "And in this one, you changed the sequence so it looks like I am looking at you during our first dance." Linda crossed her arms, a defensive little fold that made her look smaller somehow, less polished, more ordinary. "I did not remove anyone," she said. "I cropped for balance. That is what people do with photos. This is becoming ridiculous." Brooke let out a short, disbelieving breath. "Mom," she said, and there was no softness left in her voice now. "That is not balance. That is weird." Linda turned on her immediately. "Brooke, please. You have no idea how much work I put into this family. If I do not step in, things fall apart. They always have." That sentence sat in the room like a confession. Marjorie looked down at her lap. Stephen rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. I watched Ethan's face as he heard it, because this was the real reveal now, not the logs or the edits or the slideshow. This was the belief underneath all of it. The belief that every milestone, every memory, every event had to pass through Linda first in order to be legitimate. She was not just controlling photos. She was trying to control authorship. "No," Ethan said, and his voice was still calm, but it had changed. "Things do not fall apart without you. You just cannot stand not being in the center of them." Linda stared at him. That hurt her more than any accusation I could have made. I could see it in the way her chin lifted, the way her eyes sharpened. "After everything I have done for you," she said. "After everything I have organized, hosted, paid for, sacrificed. This is how you speak to me? Because your wife called a vendor and printed out a few documents." "A few documents," I said softly, finally stepping forward again. "Linda, you used my old password to get into a private gallery. You selected the worst possible versions of our wedding photos. You created a slideshow designed to make me look awkward, to erase my family, and to make yourself more visible in a day that did not belong to you. Then you brought it into my home and called it a gift." She looked at me with a kind of icy disbelief, as if the greater offense was that I had described her behavior out loud instead of enduring it in silence. "I was trying to make the photos more flattering for the family," she said. "You looked stiff in several of them, Claire. Your mother was in the wrong place half the time. And frankly, the original sequence did not highlight the important relationships." There it was again. The important relationships. Not mine. Not Ethan's. Hers. Brooke stood up then and shook her head. "I cannot believe you are still explaining this like it is normal." Marjorie finally spoke too, her voice low and tired. "Linda, this was not your place." Linda turned toward them, searching for allies, but all she found were faces that had gone carefully neutral. That was when she looked back at Ethan, expecting him to rescue her the way he always had before. He did not. He set the last print down on the table and met her eyes. "You are going to apologize to Claire," he said. "Tonight. And after that, you are never accessing anything private of ours again. Not photos. Not accounts. Not event planning. Nothing." The room stayed still, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since I married into that family, Linda was not being corrected by me. She was being denied by her son. Linda did not apologize. Not that night. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then lifted her chin with the brittle dignity of someone who still believed silence could pass for innocence if she held it long enough. "I think everyone is overreacting," she said at last, each word clipped and cool. "I try to do something thoughtful, and now I am being treated like a criminal in my own son's house." Ethan did not flinch. "This is not your house," he said. It was a simple sentence, but it changed the air in the room more than anything else had. Linda stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she had never heard before. For one strange second, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she had been humiliated, because she had built her entire identity around being indispensable, and now she was watching that illusion crack in front of the very people she had always managed so carefully. Marjorie stood first, smoothing her skirt with both hands, the way older women do when they want to signal an ending without creating a scene. "I think it is time for us to go," she said quietly. Stephen nodded and reached for his keys. Brooke did not move right away. She looked at me, then at Ethan, then at her mother, and something in her expression softened toward me in a way it never had before. "I am sorry," she said, and though she did not specify for what, I knew she meant all of it. The slideshow, the years of excuses, The way the family had learned to step around Linda's behavior instead of naming it. I nodded once. Thank you. Linda gathered her purse with stiff, efficient motions, every movement controlled, every gesture designed to suggest she was leaving by choice rather than consequence. At the door, she turned to Ethan one last time. You are making a mistake, she said. A wife comes and goes. A mother is forever. I watched his face as she said it. If she had spoken that line 6 months earlier, maybe even 6 weeks earlier, it might have landed. But after the prints, the logs, the slideshow, the sheer cold entitlement of hearing her call my wedding photos unbalanced because they did not center her, the sentence sounded exactly like what it was. A threat dressed up as wisdom. Ethan opened the front door and held it for her. Good night, Mom. She stood there a beat too long, waiting for him to pull the moment back toward her. He did not. Then, she walked out into the warm evening air without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed felt different from the one before. Less sharp, less fragile, like a house after a storm when the windows are still wet, but the pressure has finally broken. Brooke and Daniel left a few minutes later. Marjorie hugged me before she went, brief but sincere. Stephen gave Ethan a look that said more than anything he might have spoken aloud. Then it was just the two of us in the living room. The dark television screen reflecting the candlelight from the dining room. The comparison prints still scattered across the coffee table like evidence from a trial no one had expected to attend. Ethan sat down hard on the sofa and covered his face with both hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me, and there was something raw in his expression I had not seen in years. I am sorry, he said. Not just for tonight. For every time I made you explain what should have been obvious. I sat beside him, not too close at first. I did not need you to choose between us, I said. I needed you to see what was happening. He nodded slowly. I do now. The next morning, while the house was still quiet and the light was pale and gentle through the kitchen windows, I changed every password I had. Email, shared drives, photo storage, vendor accounts, our streaming services, the smart home app Linda once insisted she needed for emergencies. All of it. Then I created a private digital album with the originals only, locked and backed up in 3 places. I ordered a leather-bound print book from Maya with the real sequence of the day exactly as it happened. My father fully in frame. My mother laughing beside me. Ethan's hand steady in mine. Our first dance untouched. When the finished album arrived a week later, I placed it on the coffee table where Linda's slideshow had once played. No music, no performance, no editing. Just truth, page after page. Some women try to control a family by controlling how it is remembered. Linda almost managed it. She forgot one thing. A memory can be manipulated on a screen, but the truth has a way of surviving in the original.